We've talked to people from Taylor Recovery before. Great organization. They've really got their finger on the pulse of a lot of what's going on around the country. And we're going to talk to the general manager from the Taylor Recovery Center, Court Nichols. Court, good afternoon to you. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Pat. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me.
You bet. So it's disturbing. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in the world right now, obviously, here and in Barcelona and elsewhere that's disturbing. But another thing that's disturbing is something that maybe doesn't get the headlines that it should. It seems that opioid overdosing is rising maybe even at rates we hadn't suspected, and it seems like maybe the youngest among us might be the most afflicted.
I wouldn't say the most afflicted, but the opioid epidemic is what they're calling it. I call it a state of emergency, just like Mr. Trump has said. It's worse than a tragedy what's happening. However, there are many young teens that we are finding, especially since 2015 to 2017, we've been finding an alarming number of rate among the teens that are actually also overdosing due to opioids. Absolutely.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just a horrible thing with opioids. And then we have the whole thing, too, Court, with heroin, and heroin contaminated with fentanyl and other stuff that's being put in there to get these kids a high and get them going. And what's happening, Court, is you've got overdoses, you've got some teens dying, you got some teens just absolutely frying their brain matter.
Absolutely. And you're speaking about the fentanyl. We had a colleague of mine had an intake, and he found some heroin on an individual, and they sent it to a toxicologist. And it was actually China white heroin. They sent it to a toxicologist, and it came back as 98% fentanyl.
Wow!
And as you know, 98%. And so they're making it look exactly like what the heroin looks like. And so when you understand that fentanyl or carfentanil is not made to be used intravenously. It was designed initially to put in patches for pain. It is an opiate, and they after they started making it in patches, they started making some fentanyl pills. But now they have some of these drug dealers and these cartels have craftily come up with a design to make it look exactly like black tar and China white heroin. And the drug dealers that are selling it don't even realize that it's fentanyl. And so this is one reason why you're seeing people dropping dead at this rate.
And if you have them, obviously, if they're dead, that's absolutely horrible, which goes without saying. But for those that don't die, for those that use some of this fentanyl-enhanced stuff, I mean, is it really true, Court, that sometimes you have some brain damage, some brain injury that occurs, that it might not be reparable?
We have seen cases like that. I've seen, since 2015, I've seen 7 cases where people have flatlined and have come back out of it. In 2 of those cases, the person had lost, that the heart stopped, and the brain had no oxygen, and there was a lot of brain damage to all 3 parts of the brain. So it can definitely, sometimes it can be worse than death.
Well, absolutely horrible. If a parent thinks that there's a problem, or if they're pretty sure there's a problem, and once you get to the opioid overdosing, and once you get to fentanyl, you're pretty sure if something's going on, because your teenagers really aren't being able to function at a regular rate. If they get a hold of somebody like Taylor Recovery, is this something where you send them help? Do they need to bring the teen to you all? Are you at your Houston facility?
I am at the Houston location, yes. Do you take them in? Is it almost like an inmate situation where you bring them into your facilities? Yeah, we bring them. People fly from all over the country to come to Taylor Recovery. And at Taylor Recovery, we have 70 beds. And out of those 70 beds, roughly 86% of the people at this moment are suffering with opiate addiction. And so, yeah, people fly from all over the country. They have a lot of people, of course, from here in Houston and all over Texas. We've got people from New York and San Diego and California and Minnesota that are here now because we've designed a program here at Taylor Recovery specifically for opiate addiction. You kind of have to change with the times, and since this is what it calls for, we've designed a program specifically to help people that are suffering with opiate addiction.
If you get somebody in there, Court, that's like let's say a 15-year-old young man, and somehow opioids have become a huge part of his life and have basically taken over, and mom and dad are terrified and at wit's end, and they somehow find out, maybe through programs like this, about Taylor Recovery, they get that kid to you. On it, of course, none of it's normal, but in a normal scenario, to get from where the kid has a genuine, true opioid problem until he's probably able to walk out and go home with mom and dad and has great hope of a normal life, how quick a turn is that?
That's a really relevant and good question. So it's one thing to get somebody off of heroin, meaning to get them clean and sober. Mm-hmm. But it's a completely different process to learn how to live your life that way. Once you cross your wires and go into full-blown addiction, again, you have to learn how to live your life that way and deal with emotions. Even when you're dealing with opiate addiction, or you're dealing with meth addiction, or any addiction, that's usually, and you've probably heard this in the past, that there's usually a symptom that's a symptom of something worse. So here at Taylor Recovery, we do a lot of trauma therapy. We do different types of digging, so we can try to find out what's really going on. And that's a process to teach somebody impulse control. Because as soon as you stop doing heroin, a 15 or 16 or even a 25-year-old stops doing heroin abruptly, of course the body is going to call for it. Of course the mind is going to be calling for it. So to teach somebody impulse control and to teach somebody coping skills to learn how to deal with those type of cravings is what's needed. And so that's a process, and you can't put a time limit on it because everybody recovers differently. And so we don't put a time limit on it if we can help.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
You just assess them to see if you think that they've made it back to the land of the reality. We're talking to Court Nichols. He's the general manager of Taylor Recovery Center. If you know somebody in trouble, if that somebody is you, we've had people on from Taylor now about 3 times, including our time today with Court, and it is really to your great advantage to get connected to Taylor Recovery. You can find them online at taylorrecovery.com. Again, that's taylorrecovery.com. And Court, for your time today, sir, we appreciate it very much. Let's hope we help somebody today, okay?
Absolutely. Thank you again.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you very, very much. Court Nichols, the general manager for Taylor Recovery Center. And again, you find that at taylorrecovery.com.
You hear it almost every time you turn on the news. Opioid overdoses are on the rise, especially among older teenagers. This news barely 18 months after Sacramento became ground zero for the deadly opioid fentanyl crisis. KFBK's John Lobertini has that side of the story this morning.
Amy, the Centers for Disease Control reports that drug overdoses jumped by 15% in 2014 among men 15 to 19 years old. Among young women of that same age, it's a 35% spike between 2013 and 15. Of course, those numbers clearly the precursor of what was to come in 2016.
Their bodies are still developing. They're not mature in their addiction, if you will.
That's Court Nichols. He runs the Taylor Recovery Center in Houston.
So they don't understand the potency, and they don't understand tolerance, like someone who may have been using it over a longer period of time. That's going to lead to immediate death.
Nichols says the upswing in opioid use began with the prevalence of OxyContin and oxycodone in 2004-2005. When that became too expensive, heroin became the opioid of choice. It's cheaper, easier to get. But dealers, he says, started cutting heroin with the synthetic opioid fentanyl.
What we've seen over the last 2 years is fentanyl, which is 200 to 300 times more potent than actual heroin.
In March of 2016, fentanyl killed 12 people in Sacramento County alone. More than 50 people OD'd. For some perspective here, Dan and Amy, overdose deaths topped 1,000 for the first time in the state of New York, and since July of last year, almost half of those linked to fentanyl.